Hello, today I would like to discuss with you Rob Wells. Rob is a 10-year-old male 4th grade student who lives with his parents in Boonville, Arkansas. He is an only child born to his mother and father on September 14, 2007. Rob was a product of a normal pregnancy and normal delivery, according to his mother. However, some developmental milestones were reached at a slower than normal rate. These include standing alone, walking, speaking words, and speaking sentences. Educationally, Rob began a Mother's Touch ABC preschool program in Boonville. Upon beginning elementary school, Rob was placed in a general education setting where he remained through his 2nd grade year. And then when due to a reevaluation after his 2nd grade year, he was placed in the self-contained special education classroom, and this is his 2nd year as he continues in the self-contained classroom. His his disability category is intellectually disabled. He received speech therapy at a rate of 90 minutes per week and occupational therapy, also at the rate of 90 minutes per week. Now, we need to discuss Rob's test scores. Rob was given the RIAS test of intellectual abilities. This test assesses both verbal and nonverbal intelligence. In other words, is just seeing what his actual true intellectual abilities are. This is an important measure because these scores can help determine if Rob qualifies as a student with a disability, which again is of course why we give these tests to begin with. The RIAS here, this test is actually the first determining factor in discovering and substantiating that he does have the intellectual disability. Rob has a verbal intelligence score of 62 and a nonverbal intelligence score of 81, resulting in a composite or combined score of 66. And this score places him in a below average level of intellectual ability. All of Rob's scores fall below the standard deviation, which bear out below average intellectual abilities. Now, what the standard score is, what the standard deviation is, it's a score that if he falls at that standard deviation score or above, he's considered an average range and is okay. But if his scores are below that standard deviation, which in this case, we're fixing to talk about a subtest. All of them have a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. So if they fall 10 below that standard score of 50, the average score, the mean of 50, then that is one standard deviation. And that's okay. If he's 40 or above, we're in good shape. But below 40, then there are some concerns that we need to address for his education, for his life. The first was a test called Guess What? Rob was asked to listen to a question that contains clues that the examiner presents orally, and then he's to give answers again orally back to the presenter. In that particular test, Rob scored a 26. Verbal reasoning was another test. The tester gives an incomplete sentence, and Rob had to verbally respond and complete the sentence. And this particular score, he scored a 23. Both these verbal subtests fall 2 standard deviations below the mean. In other words, it didn't just fall to 40, they fell 30 and below, which highlights a significant area of concern. Now, on the nonverbal intelligence, his first test was called Odd Item Out. Rob was given a set of pictures, and he had to determine which picture was different than the rest of the pictures. For this, Rob scored a 35. Then he had another subtest called What's Missing. Rob was given a picture and had to determine what was missing from the picture. In this particular test, he scored a 39. So both of those, you can see, is below the standard deviation, which would be 40. And again, 40 and below, it raises an area of concern. Now, next test he was given the Wyatt 3 Achievement Test. This is basically a test that measures his academic ability. Things such as oral language, reading, writing, math, that sort of thing. And it tests what is his actual academic ability level. This test is also important because it helps us again understand if a disability exists. And these scores also, again, they have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. So what we're looking for again is scores that are 85 or above. Those scores are average and don't highlight any concern. If the scores are below 85, then we have reason to be concerned. For Rob's oral language test, and again, these are composite scores, and we'll talk a little bit more about the subtest in a moment, but his composite score for oral language, his standard score is 55, and he had a percentile rank of 0.1. In other words, he scored better than 0.1% of students who took the test. His total achievement, he had a standard score of 65. His percentile rank was actually 1%. He scored better than 1% of other students taking the test. As can be seen by both his oral language and the total achievement, both those composite scores fall more than 2 standard deviations from the mean and highlight very serious concern for us as we go forward to try to help Rob. At the subtest, the first one was listening comprehension. He had a standard score of 58, and he scored better than 0.3% of other students taking the test. His early reading skills, he had a standard score of 81, and a percentile rank where he scored better than 10% of other students taking the test. Math problem solving, he scored a 75, and which he scored better than 5% of other students. Writing fluency, he scored a 76, which again put him scoring better than 5% of other students. And finally, oral expression, he scored a 57. He scored better than 0.2% of other students. As you can see, all of these do fall below the standard deviation of 15. They fell below that score of 85, which gives us reason for concern and bears out that a disability does exist. Had there been only one or a few areas that fell below 85, we could have considered a specific learning disability. However, since every score is low and not merely 1 or 2 scores, it becomes increasingly evident that Rob's disability category is likely that of intellectually disabled. So far we have 2 of the components for that. His intellectual test, his of the RIAS, his composite score of 66 was below average, and then also the Y3, all those subtests and the composite scores were below the average. So far both of those do bear out that he has an intellectual disability. Now, as far as academically, Rob's strengths are counting and basic addition. He does okay with those. He can count to 30. He can add 1 column addition, and he can do some 2 column addition, but not much with regrouping. When he has to regroup, that becomes a problem. I'm going to move on now to the adaptive behavior, because it's the 3rd cog in the wheel of whether or not he has an intellectual disability. The adaptive behavior evaluation scale revised 2nd edition was given to Rob to assess his adaptive functional skills in order to aid us in making decisions for his education. Basically what happens with this is the parents were given a form and his teacher were given a form. It's the same rating scale, it's the same, it's just one's a home version and one's a school version. They both have to fill this out and rate him on a scale. Now, if the scores are they're based on a mean of 10 and a standard deviation of 3. So once again, if he scores a 7 or above, we're not concerned at all. He falls within the standard deviation, and this is a good thing. If he scores below 7, it begins to show areas of weakness. But if he falls 2 standard deviations below, and he gets a 4 or below, serious areas of concern to highlight that perhaps he does have a disability. Now, each of these, both of these forms, there are 10 skills on that form that receive a rating. And those skills, basically, it's about his life, about his functioning ability in everyday settings, in everyday situations, and how well he does with those, as compared to the norm of you and I who do not have a disability. And those 10 areas are as follows: communication skills, social, self-care, functional academics, leisure, home living, self-direction, community use, health and safety, and work. The teacher filled out a form, and on her form scored every item below a 4, or 2 standard deviations below the mean, which again shows serious areas of concern in each of those 10 adaptive behavior skills. The areas of difference and the parent scores, because they were a little different, the parent did score him much higher in a few areas. Functional academics, he scored a 5 on the parent form. Leisure, he scored a 7. Self-direction, he scored a 7. In work, he scored a 5. But that's just 4 areas that he scored above a 4. All the other areas he scored below a 4, 2 standard deviations below the mean, which again highlight the serious area of concern. So the overall view of the adaptive behavior rating forms point to a concern in the area of adaptive behavior. And this again is a part of the eligibility criteria in which we determine if a child has an intellectual disability. And so far, all three, this adaptive behavior, the WIAT-3, which was the academic achievement test, and the RIAS, which was his intellectual ability. All of those are at this point are bearing out that he does have an intellectual disability. And the last criteria, did all these things, did his disability have onset before the age of 18 or while he was still in his developing stage? And the answer is yes, seeing how as a child just turned 10 in September. Now, I do completely agree with the finding that Rob is eligible to receive special education services as a student with an intellectual disability. Now, finally, I would like to just discuss some of his strengths and weaknesses and perhaps give some recommendations on what we can do to help Rob. His strengths: answering what, where, and who questions. He does alert to his name. He states his name, and he understands his feelings. As far as his weaknesses: oral expression, reading, writing fluency, listening comprehension, math problem-solving skills, and adaptive behavior skills fall as Rob's weaknesses. A few recommendations before we close. As listening comprehension is a definite weakness, he should receive small group instruction and, when possible, one-to-one instruction. This minimizes the outside noise and perhaps will allow him to listen better, which would enhance his ability to comprehend. For his deficits in reading, writing fluency, and math, teachers should model the skills they want him to perform, and they give lots of opportunity for him to practice those skills. Models should be provided as much as necessary. Even if it's been modeled before, model it again. It's just helping him to be able to remember the intellectual disability. Sometimes their ability to recall information just isn't there. And so rehashing those models over and over again will be helpful and beneficial to Rob. Concerning reading, we should assess his current reading level. And whatever that reading level is, no matter how low, he should get books on that reading level, and he should have multiple opportunities to read so he can enhance his fluency and his comprehension. For his issues stemming from oral expression, teachers should listen and then paraphrase what the child has said and repeat it back to him. And this will enhance communication for both Rob, who sent the message, and for the teacher who received the message. Paraphrase it and repeat it back to him so we can be clear on what Rob's needs and wants are. For his adaptive behavior deficits, daily tasks should be broken down into steps, and those steps should be posted on the wall next to the sink, for instance. If he's needing steps on brushing his teeth, should have pictures of those steps. Number 1, perhaps turning on the water. Number 2, picking up the brush. Number 3, putting toothpaste on the brush and the toothbrush, etc. And we go through the entire steps until he's through brushing his teeth. And then combining strategies is also suggested along the way. And this particular would be a perfect opportunity so you can see those steps, and they could also have the model which would further support him as he learns those adaptive behavior skills. Well, this pretty well sums up our discussion about Rob today, and I hope it's been helpful, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.